I found the notice taped to my front door on a Tuesday morning, and my coffee went cold in my hand as I read the neat typed words informing me that my fence was 3 inches too tall according to the Meadowbrook Estates HOA guidelines. My name is Oliver Vaughn, and I had lived in this subdivision outside Midland, Texas for 6 years without major incident. The fence had been there when I bought the place, inspected and approved by the previous HOA board. But now, apparently, it was a problem. The letter was signed by Brenda Patterson, the new HOA president who had taken office 3 months earlier with the enthusiasm of someone who had finally found her calling in life. That calling, it seemed, was making everyone else miserable. I crumpled the notice and tossed it in the recycling bin. I had bigger concerns than Brenda's measuring tape. My surveying company had been struggling with the downturn in oil prices, and I was behind on 2 mortgages. The fence could wait. But Brenda apparently could not. She showed up at my door that evening, her blonde bob perfectly styled despite the West Texas wind, her pantsuit crisp enough to cut glass. She was maybe 45 with the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Vaughn, I trust you received our notice," she said, not waiting for an invitation before consulting her clipboard. "The fence needs to be corrected within 30 days, or we'll be forced to impose daily fines of $50. "The fence was here when I bought the house," I said, keeping my voice level. "It passed inspection." "That was under the old board," Brenda said, her smile tightening. "We're enforcing the actual written guidelines now. The maximum height is 6 feet. Yours measures 6 feet 3 inches. It's 3 inches, Brenda. Rules are rules." "Oliver, may I call you Oliver?" She didn't wait for an answer. "This neighborhood has standards. Property values depend on everyone doing their part." I wanted to argue, but I was tired and I knew that arguing with Brenda was like arguing with a brick wall that filled out paperwork. "I'll look into it. Wonderful. Oh, and there's the matter of your lawn. It's looking a bit brown in patches. Section 12, paragraph 4 of our covenants requires that all lawns be maintained in a lush green condition year-round. It's been 98 degrees for 2 weeks straight. Other homeowners manage just fine. Perhaps more frequent watering?" She made a note on her clipboard. "I'll expect to see improvement within 14 days. After she left, I poured myself a bourbon and sat on my back porch, looking out at the scrubby land that stretched beyond the subdivision. Meadowbrook Estates had been carved out of ranch land 10 years ago, a collection of 200 homes surrounding a small park and pond that served as the common area. Beyond the manicured lawns and identical mailboxes, the landscape returned to its natural state, tough and unforgiving. My phone rang. It was Marcus Chen, my business partner at Vaughn Chen Surveying. "Got a call today from Diamondback Energy," Marcus said. "They want us to do some preliminary surveys on land south of here. Might be a good contract." "We could use it," I said. "Send me the details." "Will do." "Hey, you still have those old geological reports from when we did that ranch survey 5 years ago? The Thompson property?" I thought back.
"Yeah, should be in the archives. Why?"
"Just curious. I was looking at some regional maps, and there's an interesting formation that runs through this area. Remember that Permian Basin expansion everyone was talking about?"
"Vaguely."
"Well, it's not as tapped out as people thought. There are some secondary formations that might be viable with new drilling techniques. That Thompson ranch we surveyed, it sits right on top of one." "Good for the Thompsons," I said, "if they haven't sold it already." Actually, they sold it to the developer who built Meadowbrook. Most of it anyway. But here's the thing, I was looking at the original plot maps in the HOA common area, that park and pond. That's technically still the old Thompson Ranch plot. The developer bought it separately and dedicated it as common space. But the mineral rights. I sat up straighter. What about the mineral rights? In Texas, mineral rights can be separated from surface rights. It's not automatic. I'd have to check the actual deed, but if the developer only bought surface rights to that common area, the mineral rights might still belong to whoever owned them before, the Thompsons, or whoever they sold them to. Could be nothing. Could be someone already owns them and just hasn't done anything, but it might be worth checking out. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness thinking. In Texas, mineral rights were serious business. If someone owned the rights under that HOA common area, they could potentially lease them to an oil company. And if there was actually oil down there, given recent advances in horizontal drilling and fracking technology, it might be economically viable to extract it. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office in Midland. The woman behind the counter was helpful, pulling up deed records on her computer. The Meadowbrook Estates development had been complex, involving multiple parcels and transfers, but she walked me through it, tracing the ownership history. The original Thompson Ranch had been split up in 2014. Most of it went to Sunbelt Developers LLC, which built the subdivision. But there was a separate transaction for the 10-acre parcel that became the HOA common area. The surface rights had been transferred to the HOA upon completion of the development. The mineral rights, however, had been retained by Margaret Thompson in the original sale, then transferred to her daughter Grace Campbell in 2019. Do you have contact information for Grace Campbell? I asked. The clerk shook her head. Not in these records, but you could try searching online or maybe hire a skip tracer if it's important. I thanked her and left, my mind racing. This was a long shot, probably a wild goose chase. Even if I could find Grace Campbell, even if she still owned the mineral rights, even if there was actually oil down there, what were the chances she'd want to lease them? And what did that have to do with my problems with Brenda and the HOA? But something about it nagged at me. Maybe it was the surveyor in me, the part that liked solving puzzles and finding hidden connections in land records. Maybe it was just desperation, looking for any kind of leverage against an HOA that seemed determined to find me into submission. Either way, I decided to pursue it. Finding Grace Campbell took 3 days and the help of a private investigator I'd worked with on property disputes. She lived in Austin, worked as a lawyer, and had apparently forgotten she even owned mineral rights in Midland. When I called her, she was surprised to hear from me. Honestly, I haven't thought about that in years, she said. My mom kept those rights when she sold the ranch. She always said you never know what might be valuable someday. When she passed, they came to me, but I never did anything with them. Is this about wanting to buy them? Maybe, I said carefully. I'd like to talk to you about them. Would you be open to meeting? We agreed to meet the following week at a coffee shop in Austin. Grace Campbell was in her early 30s, with dark hair and the efficient manner of someone who billed by the hour. We sat outside despite the heat, and I explained the situation. So let me understand this, she said. You live in a neighborhood that was built on my family's old ranch. The HOA is giving you trouble, and you think there might be oil under the common area where I still own mineral rights. That's the situation, yes. I'm a surveyor, and my partner noticed some geological formations that suggest there could be viable reserves. But I'm not an oil man. I don't have the resources to develop anything. What I'm thinking is this: if you were willing to lease those mineral rights, and if there is oil, an oil company would pay for the rights to drill. In Texas, they can drill horizontally from outside the property, but they'd still need your permission as the mineral rights owner. And you want what exactly? A percentage of any lease payments, I said, for bringing you the opportunity and helping facilitate it. But more than that, I want the leverage. If there's oil under that HOA common area, and if an oil company wants to access it, suddenly the HOA isn't the most powerful entity in the neighborhood anymore. You would be. Grace leaned back, studying me. You really don't like your HOA. They're threatening to fine me $50 a day over 3 inches of fence height. The president shows up at my door with a clipboard and a god complex. Yeah, I'm not a fan. She laughed. I've heard HOA horror stories. Never lived in one myself. Okay, I'm interested, but I'm also a lawyer, so I want to do this right. First, we need to confirm there's actually oil down there. Second, we need to make sure my ownership of those mineral rights is clear and uncontested. Third, if we approach an oil company, we need a solid lease agreement that protects both of us. Can you handle the geological research? I can get us preliminary data. If it looks promising, we'd need to bring in a petroleum geologist to do a proper assessment. Fine. Let's start there. And Oliver, if this actually works, I want more than just money from a lease. If the HOA has been as bad as you say, I want to make them squirm a little. Is that petty? Probably, I said. But I'm okay with petty right now. Over the next month, I threw myself into research. Marcus and I pulled every geological survey we could find for the area. We contacted a petroleum geologist named Dr. Raymond Silva, who worked as an independent consultant. He reviewed our data with professional skepticism, but after studying the core samples from nearby wells and the seismic surveys that had been done in the region, he agreed to do a preliminary analysis. There's definitely potential here, Dr. Silva told us in his office, surrounded by maps and rock samples. This area sits on the eastern edge of the Permian Basin's Central Basin Platform. Most of the development has been further west, but new techniques have made some of these eastern formations economically viable. The common area you're talking about, if I'm reading these surveys correctly, sits above what could be a significant pocket in the Spraberry Formation. Could be nothing, could be substantial. Only way to know for sure would be to drill, or at least to do seismic testing on site. What would an oil company pay for mineral rights to something like that? I asked. Depends on a lot of factors: size of the formation, quality of the oil, current market prices, difficulty of extraction. But if it's as promising as it looks, could be anywhere from a few thousand an acre as a signing bonus plus royalties on production. On 10 acres, if there's actually good reserves down there, you could be looking at 6 figures in lease payments, plus ongoing royalties that could be substantial if they hit big. I called Grace with the news. She'd already done her legal homework, confirming her ownership of the mineral rights and researching Texas oil and gas law. Here's the thing, she said. In Texas, mineral rights are dominant over surface rights. That means if I want to extract minerals from under that property, I have the right to do so, and the surface rights owner, which is the HOA, can't stop me. But we need to be reasonable about surface access, and we'd want to avoid an ugly legal fight if possible. The smart play is to find an oil company that's interested, get a solid lease offer, and then approach the HOA with a deal that benefits everyone. You want to negotiate with them? I want to negotiate from a position of strength. Big difference. First, let's see if we can get an oil company interested. That turned out to be easier than I expected. The Permian Basin was seeing renewed interest, and Diamondback Energy, the same company that had contacted Marcus about survey work, agreed to meet with us after I sent them Dr. Silva's preliminary report. The meeting took place in their Midland office, a modern building that smelled like new carpet and money. The landman representing Diamondback was a woman named Patricia Reeves, maybe 50, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years in the oil fields before moving into an office role. She reviewed our information with interest. "We've been looking at properties in this area," Patricia said. "Most of the land is already leased or developed, but there are some gaps. This common area situation is unusual. You're sure the mineral rights are clear?" Grace handed her a folder. "Complete chain of title going back 70 years. I own them outright, no disputes, no liens, no complications, and the surface rights belong to a homeowners association." Patricia shook her head, almost smiling. "That's a new one. Usually we're dealing with farmers or ranchers who understand the business. An HOA full of suburban homeowners is going to be a challenge." "That's where I come in," I said. "I live in the neighborhood. I know the people and the politics. We can make this work." Patricia studied the geological data again. "Okay, here's what we can offer. Pending seismic testing and board approval, we'd be willing to lease the mineral rights for $5,000 per acre signing bonus. That's $50,000 total, plus a 20% royalty on any oil and gas produced. Standard lease terms, 5 years with options to extend if we're actively drilling. We'd drill horizontally from a pad location outside the neighborhood, minimizing surface disruption. But we'd need easements for some monitoring equipment, and we'd need cooperation from the HOA on a few technical matters." I did the math in my head. $50,000 up front, split between Grace and me according to whatever arrangement we worked out, plus 20% of production revenues. If they hit a decent well, the royalties could be substantial, potentially hundreds of thousands a year, maybe more. "We'd want some provisions," Grace said, shifting into lawyer mode. "Environmental protections, liability coverage, and a clause that guarantees access regardless of any HOA interference. Also a higher royalty rate, 25%. They negotiated for another hour. I mostly stayed quiet, letting Grace handle it. She was good, pressing on points that mattered while conceding things that didn't. They eventually settled on 23% royalties, $55,000 signing bonus, and robust legal protections. Patricia said she'd have contracts drawn up within a week, pending seismic testing approval from the HOA. That's when reality hit me. We'd need to get the HOA's permission to do seismic testing on the common area. And that meant dealing with Brenda. The monthly HOA meeting was held in the community center, a bland room with folding chairs and fluorescent lights that hummed like dying insects. About 30 homeowners showed up, which was typical. Most people only came if they had a specific complaint or were being fined for something. I usually avoided these meetings, but tonight I was here with a purpose. Brenda sat at the front table with the other board members. Treasurer Gary Mitchell, a retired accountant who looked perpetually worried. Secretary Deborah Kim, who seemed nice but exhausted, and Vice President Frank Walsh, a large man who worked in car sales and had the aggressive friendliness of his profession. Brenda called the meeting to order with theatrical formality, going through old business with painful attention to detail. Someone's mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Someone else had left their trash cans visible from the street for 4 hours past pickup. The fines were discussed and approved with grim efficiency. When we got to new business, I raised my hand. "Yes, Oliver?" Brenda's voice dripped with false sweetness. "Here to discuss your fence situation." "Actually, I'm here about the common area," I said, standing up. "I'd like to propose allowing seismic testing on the property." The room went quiet. Brenda's smile froze. "Seismic testing? What are you talking about?" I explained the situation as clearly as I could. The mineral rights under the common area were privately owned, not by the HOA. An oil company was interested in leasing those rights. They wanted to do seismic testing to confirm the geological data before finalizing a lease. The testing was non-invasive, wouldn't damage the park or pond, and would take less than a day. "Absolutely not," Brenda said before I'd even finished. "The common area is HOA property. We're not turning it into some industrial site. The surface is HOA property," I said. "The mineral rights aren't. In Texas, mineral rights are dominant. The owner doesn't legally need HOA permission to test or drill, but they're being courteous by asking." "That's ridiculous," Frank said. "If the HOA owns the land, we own what's under it too. That's not how it works in Texas, I said. Mineral rights can be and often are separate from surface rights. I've confirmed this with the county records. The mineral rights under the common area are privately owned. Brenda's face had gone red. And I suppose you just happened to discover this. I did discover it, yes, as part of my work as a surveyor, and I've brought the opportunity to the mineral rights owner. So you stand to profit from this. Her voice was sharp, accusatory. If the lease goes through, yes, I'll receive a finder's fee. But that's not the point. The point is this is happening whether the HOA cooperates or not. The owner of the mineral rights has the legal authority to extract resources from under that property. We're trying to do this in a way that minimizes disruption and respects the neighborhood. What kind of disruption are we talking about? Deborah asked, speaking for the first time. She sounded genuinely concerned rather than hostile. The testing itself is minimal. They'd set up some sensors, create small vibrations, and measure the readings. Takes a few hours, leaves no permanent trace. If they decide to drill, they'd do it horizontally from a pad location outside the neighborhood. You might see some truck traffic for equipment placement, but the actual drilling rig wouldn't be anywhere near homes. And we're supposed to just trust an oil company? Brenda said. Trust you? You don't have to trust anyone, I said. You can have your lawyer review the access agreement. You can require specific conditions, but you can't stop it from happening. That's Texas law. The meeting erupted into argument. Some homeowners were intrigued by the idea of oil under the neighborhood, seeing it as interesting or potentially beneficial. Others were horrified, imagining toxic spills and earthquakes. Brenda tried to maintain control, but the genie was out of the bottle. Finally, Gary spoke up, his voice quiet but carrying weight. Brenda, I think we need to consult an attorney before we make any decisions here. If what Oliver is saying is true about the mineral rights, we could be opening the HOA up to legal liability if we interfere. Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but even she could see the room was split. Fine, we'll table this until next month's meeting and get legal advice. Meeting adjourned. As people filed out, several homeowners approached me. Some were angry, blaming me for bringing this problem to the neighborhood. Others were curious, asking questions about how it would work and whether there might be benefits. One older man named George, who lived 3 doors down from me, clapped me on the shoulder. About time someone stood up to Brenda, he said quietly. She fined me $200 last month because my house numbers weren't reflective enough. Maybe this'll take her down a peg. But Brenda wasn't about to be taken down easily. Over the next week, she launched a campaign against the oil testing, sending emails to all homeowners describing the dangers of fossil fuel extraction, the risk to property values, and questioning my motives. She called an emergency board meeting, which I wasn't invited to, and somehow got the board to vote to deny access to the common area for any oil-related activities. When Grace saw the formal denial letter, she wasn't surprised. We expected this. Now we respond with our own letter, explaining the legal situation and giving them one more chance to cooperate. If they refuse, we file suit. A lawsuit could take months, I said. It won't. We'll ask for expedited proceedings and a preliminary injunction allowing the testing to proceed while the case is heard. With the legal precedent in Texas about mineral rights dominance, we'll get it. The HOA's lawyer will tell them they're going to lose, and they'll fold. She was right, but it wasn't quite that simple. The HOA hired an attorney, a man named Douglas Preston, who specialized in real estate law. He reviewed the situation and, according to the documents that later became public record, advised the board that they would almost certainly lose any legal challenge to the mineral rights. But Brenda convinced the board to fight anyway, arguing that giving in would set a dangerous precedent. We filed suit in district court in late September. Grace handled most of the legal work, though she brought in a Texas oil and gas attorney named Kenneth Wright to assist. The case was straightforward. We were asking the court to confirm Grace's ownership of the mineral rights and issue an injunction requiring the HOA to allow reasonable access for testing and potential future development. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for mid-October. In the meantime, life in Meadowbrook Estates became increasingly tense. Brenda doubled down on enforcement, finding violations everywhere she looked. My fence was still 3 inches too tall, and the daily fines started accumulating. My lawn was too brown in places. My mailbox had a small dent that violated aesthetic standards. Other homeowners who'd expressed support for the oil testing found themselves suddenly in violation of various rules. The retaliation was obvious enough that Grace added harassment claims to our lawsuit. Kenneth Wright seemed almost gleeful about it. HOAs get in trouble when they start selective enforcement, he explained over the phone. If they're fining you for things they ignore in other homeowners, that's discriminatory. If they're clearly retaliating against you for asserting legal rights, that's actionable. She's making our case stronger. The hearing took place on a Thursday morning. The courtroom was in downtown Midland, a modern building that smelled like floor wax and recycled air. Judge Martin Wheeler presided, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a reputation for being smart and impatient with nonsense. Douglas Preston argued the HOA's case, claiming that allowing oil development would irreparably harm the neighborhood character, damage property values, and pose environmental risks. He acknowledged the mineral rights separation but argued that the HOA's surface rights included the power to regulate and restrict activities that affected the community. Grace systematically dismantled his arguments. She walked through Texas case law establishing the dominance of mineral rights, showed that the testing and drilling plans posed minimal surface disruption, and presented evidence of the HOA's retaliatory enforcement against me. Kenneth Wright added technical testimony about modern drilling techniques and safety protocols. Judge Wheeler listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and took a brief recess to review the submitted materials. When he returned, his ruling was decisive. The law in Texas is clear, he said. Mineral rights, when properly separated from surface rights, are dominant. Ms. Campbell owns the mineral rights under the property in question. Those rights include the ability to test for and extract resources subject to reasonable accommodation of surface owners' interests. The testing proposed here is minimally invasive and temporary. The drilling, if it occurs, will be conducted from off-site and will not materially interfere with the HOA's use of the surface property. The injunction is granted. The HOA shall provide reasonable access for testing within 7 days. Brenda, sitting in the gallery, looked like she'd been slapped. As we left the courthouse, she followed us outside. "This isn't over," she said to me, her voice low and angry. "You think you're so smart, but you're destroying this neighborhood. Everyone will blame you when their property values crash because we're living on top of an oil field." "That's not going to happen," I said. "And even if property values were affected, that's not your call to make. You're not the queen of Meadowbrook Estates, Brenda. You're just the HOA president, and you need to learn the difference." Her face went purple. "I'll see you at the next meeting. We'll vote to remove you from the neighborhood." "You can't vote to remove someone from the neighborhood," Grace said, stepping between us. "That's not how HOAs work. But you can vote to remove yourself from the board, which I'd suggest you consider. Otherwise, we'll be filing additional claims for harassment and seeking damages." The seismic testing happened 3 days later. A Diamondback crew showed up early in the morning with a truck full of equipment. They were professional and efficient, setting up sensors around the park and pond, creating controlled vibrations with specialized equipment, and recording the subsurface geological data. The whole process took about 6 hours, and when they left, you couldn't tell they'd been there. The results were promising. Dr. Silva called me 2 days later, excited in his reserved, scientific way. "The formation is there, and it's better than we thought," he said. "Based on the seismic data and comparison with nearby producing wells, we're looking at potentially significant reserves. Not a giant field, but absolutely economically viable with current technology and prices. Diamondback is going to want to move forward." Patricia from Diamondback confirmed it the next day. They wanted to finalize the lease, begin the permitting process, and start drilling within 6 months. The signing bonus check would be cut as soon as the paperwork was complete. Grace and I met in Austin to sign the final agreements and work out our own arrangement. We agreed on a 60-40 split in her favor for the signing bonus and ongoing royalties, which seemed fair given that she owned the rights and I'd just connected the dots. Even with that split, my share of the signing bonus was over $20,000, the most money I'd seen at once in years, and if the well produced as expected, the royalty payments could be substantial and ongoing. "So what now?" Grace asked as we finished the paperwork. "You've got your money and your leverage. What are you going to do with it?" "Fix my fence, I guess," I said, and we both laughed. "But seriously, I want to make sure this development happens right. Diamondback seems professional, but I want to stay involved, make sure they follow through on the environmental protections and community commitments." "Good. I'll feel better knowing someone local is keeping an eye on things. And Oliver, thank you for bringing this to me. My mom always said those mineral rights would be worth something someday. I think she'd be happy about this." The November HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread about the oil discovery, the lawsuit, and the lease. The local newspaper had run a story, portraying it as a David versus Goliath tale of a homeowner standing up to his HOA. Some people saw me as a hero. Others blamed me for bringing industry into their suburban paradise. Brenda opened the meeting with barely controlled fury. She went through the normal business with mechanical efficiency, then turned to the oil situation. "As you all know, the court has ruled against the HOA regarding the mineral rights under our common area," she said, her voice tight. "An oil company will be drilling under our neighborhood. This is a direct threat to our property values, our quality of life, and our children's safety. The board has explored options for appeal, but our attorney advises that further legal action would be expensive and unlikely to succeed. "So what are you proposing?" someone asked. "We're proposing a special assessment to raise funds for ongoing legal resistance and to explore purchasing the mineral rights ourselves." The room erupted. A special assessment meant every homeowner would be charged additional fees beyond their normal dues. The amounts Brenda was suggesting, several $1,000s per household, were shocking. I stood up. "This is insane. The mineral rights aren't for sale. And even if they were, why would the HOA spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to prevent something that isn't actually harmful? The drilling will happen from outside the neighborhood. The environmental protections are solid, and some homeowners might actually benefit from this." "Benefit how?" Brenda sneered. "Are you going to share your blood money with everyone?" "Actually," I said, "I've been talking with Diamondback about that. They're willing to work with the HOA on a community benefits agreement. Things like funding for park improvements, annual contributions to neighborhood amenities, priority hiring for any local jobs related to the operation. But that requires cooperation, not this scorched earth approach." Gary, the treasurer, spoke up. "I move that we table the special assessment discussion until we've explored what kind of community benefits might be available. This board has a fiduciary duty to act in the homeowner's best interests, and spending hundreds of thousands on a legal fight we're likely to lose doesn't seem like good stewardship." Deborah seconded the motion. Even Frank, usually Brenda's loyal supporter, looked uncomfortable with the special assessment idea. The vote was 3-1 to table it, with only Brenda voting no. Her control over the board was slipping. Over the next month, more homeowners started questioning her leadership. The selective enforcement and retaliatory fines became a bigger issue. Someone created a Facebook group for Meadowbrook residents to discuss HOA issues, and it quickly filled with complaints about Brenda's management style. At the December meeting, a petition was presented calling for a special election to recall the entire board. It had signatures from over half the homeowners in the development. Under the HOA's bylaws, that was enough to force an election in January. Brenda fought it, claiming the petition was invalid for technical reasons. But the HOA's attorney advised her that the petition was properly executed, and the election had to proceed. She looked diminished somehow, her carefully constructed authority crumbling. "I didn't run for the board myself. I'd made enough enemies and didn't want the responsibility. But George, my neighbor, ran for president on a platform of reasonable enforcement and working cooperatively with the oil development. Deborah ran for election as secretary. Several other moderate candidates emerged, people who'd been frustrated with Brenda's reign but hadn't known how to challenge it. The election was held on a cold January evening in the community center. The turnout was higher than any previous HOA meeting, over 100 homeowners showing up to vote. When the results were tallied, George had won the presidency by a solid margin. Brenda came in third, not even securing a board seat. The new board was composed entirely of people committed to a less confrontational approach to governance. Brenda attended one more meeting after the election, sitting in the audience with a look of barely suppressed rage. During the public comment period, she stood and delivered a bitter speech about how the neighborhood was going to regret their choices, how property values would plummet, how the oil development would destroy everything they'd built. Most people just looked uncomfortable. A few looked sad for her. She moved out of Meadowbrook Estates 3 months later, putting her house on the market and leaving without ceremony. I heard she bought a condo in a different development, one where she wasn't on the board and couldn't control anyone's fence height. The drilling began in March. Diamondback set up their pad location on industrial land about half a mile from the neighborhood, far enough that we couldn't hear the rig. The actual drilling took about 40 days, working around the clock. They drilled down over 8,000 feet, then horizontally for nearly 2 miles, passing under the Meadowbrook common area and several adjacent properties. I visited the drill site several times, fascinated by the operation. The technology was impressive, allowing them to extract oil from precise locations deep underground without disturbing the surface above. Patricia kept me updated on their progress, and Dr. Silva explained the geological findings as they drilled through different formations. When they hit the main production zone in the Spraberry Formation, the results exceeded expectations. The well tested at over 400 barrels per day, a solid producer by current standards. At prevailing oil prices, that translated to substantial revenue, and our 23% royalty meant significant ongoing income for Grace and me. The first royalty check arrived in May, 6 months after the well started producing. My share was just over $18,000 for that month alone. Grace called me when she got hers. "This is surreal," she said. "I'm a lawyer. I'm used to working for my money. Having checks show up because oil is being pumped out of ground I happen to own mineral rights to. It feels like cheating somehow." "It's not cheating," I said. "Your family owned that land for generations. Your mom had the foresight to keep the mineral rights. This is just those rights finally paying off. I know, it's just strange. Hey, have you thought about what you're going to do with the money? I had thought about it. A lot. The immediate financial pressure was gone. I'd paid off my debts, caught up on my mortgages, and had money in the bank for the first time in years. But more than that, I had options now, room to breathe and plan for the future. I'm thinking about expanding the business, I said. Marcus and I have been talking about bringing on another surveyor, maybe bidding on bigger contracts. The oil boom in West Texas is creating opportunities. Good for you. Use it wisely. The community benefits agreement that Diamondback negotiated with the new HOA board brought improvements to Meadowbrook Estates that would have been impossible otherwise. They funded a complete renovation of the park, including new playground equipment, walking trails, and landscaping around the pond. They contributed $50,000 annually to a neighborhood improvement fund. They hired local contractors whenever possible for work related to the well, bringing some economic benefit to the community. Property values didn't crash. In fact, they held steady and even increased slightly, partly because of the improvements funded by the oil money, partly because the market in Midland was strong overall. The predicted environmental catastrophe never materialized. Diamondback operated professionally, with proper safety protocols and environmental monitoring. Life in the neighborhood continued much as it had before, except with a nicer park and less hostile HOA meetings. The most surprising development came in August, over a year after the whole saga began. I received a letter from an attorney representing Sunbelt Developers LLC, the company that had originally built Meadowbrook Estates. They were interested in acquiring the mineral rights under the rest of the development, properties they'd sold without retaining minerals. They'd seen how valuable those rights could be, and wanted to consolidate ownership before other mineral rights holders caught on. I had no mineral rights to sell, I'd never owned them, but I referred them to Grace. She contacted me after her meeting with them, sounding both amused and amazed. They offered me $200,000 for the mineral rights under the common area, she said, even though we've already leased them to Diamondback. They want to own them outright, probably thinking they'll be worth more in the long run as oil prices increase or technology improves. Are you going to sell? I don't know. The royalty payments are good, and they'll continue for years as long as the well produces. But $200,000 is real money now, guaranteed. It's tempting. What would your mom have done? There was a pause. She would have kept them. She always believed in holding on to assets that produced income. Selling for a lump sum would have felt like giving up future potential. There's your answer then. Grace didn't sell. The monthly royalty checks continued, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on production levels and oil prices, but always substantial. My business grew. Marcus and I hired 2 more surveyors and started taking contracts throughout the Permian Basin. The skills and connections from the Meadowbrook situation opened doors I hadn't known existed. I did fix my fence eventually, lowered it exactly 3 inches just because I could now afford to hire someone to do it properly. George, the new HOA president, saw it and laughed. You know we wouldn't have fined you anyway, right? He said. New board policy, no fines for minor violations unless there's a clear safety or aesthetic issue. 3 inches of fence height doesn't qualify. I know, I said, but it's nice to have it done right, no loose ends. The second well was drilled 14 months after the first, Diamondback exercising their option to develop additional portions of the lease. This one was even better, testing at over 500 barrels per day. The royalty payments increased correspondingly. Grace and I had become accidental oil magnates, though on a small scale compared to the real players in West Texas. We met for dinner in Austin in October, almost 2 years after that first phone call when I'd explained about the mineral rights. We went to a nice steakhouse, the kind of place I couldn't have afforded before. I've been thinking, Grace said over wine. This whole thing happened because you were curious and persistent, because you saw an opportunity where no one else did. Most people would have just paid the fence fine and moved on. Most people aren't surveyor nerds who spend their free time reading county land records, I said. True, but it got me thinking about other properties. My family sold off a lot of land over the years, different parcels to different buyers. I wonder how many times the mineral rights got separated from the surface. I wonder what else might be out there, forgotten in some filing cabinet in county offices across Texas. You want to do this again, maybe, as a side business. Research mineral rights ownership, find separated rights that the owners have forgotten about, match them with geological data suggesting value, approach the owners with opportunities. There's got to be more situations like this across Texas and Oklahoma, New Mexico, Louisiana. That's not a bad idea, I said slowly. Marcus and I have access to geological data through our surveying work. We know how to research land records. We could identify promising situations, then approach the mineral rights owners as consultants exactly, not trying to buy the rights ourselves. just connecting owners with opportunities and taking a finder's fee. Ethical, legal, and potentially lucrative. We talked through the logistics, the research methods, the legal considerations. By the end of dinner, we'd sketched out a rough business plan for what we were calling Mineral Rights Research LLC. It would be a side venture for both of us, not replacing our main careers but providing additional income and intellectual challenge. The business launched quietly in January. We identified 6 promising situations in the first 4 months. Cases where mineral rights had been separated from surface rights years ago and the current owners had no idea they were sitting on potential value. 3 of them led nowhere, the geology not as promising as we'd hoped. 2 resulted in modest lease deals with small independent oil companies. 1 hit big, a situation in Oklahoma where an elderly widow owned mineral rights under what was now a shopping center, sitting above a newly discovered formation. The lease payment was substantial, and her family was grateful for the unexpected windfall. Back in Meadowbrook Estates, life settled into a new normal. The oil wells produced steadily. The park thrived with its new improvements. George ran the HOA with a light touch, enforcing genuinely important rules while ignoring petty violations. The neighborhood Facebook group became a place for actual community building rather than complaints about Brenda. I still lived in my house with the properly height-adjusted fence. I still worked as a surveyor, though now with a bigger company and better contracts. I still drank bourbon on my back porch, looking out at the West Texas landscape. But the crushing financial stress was gone, replaced by a kind of stability I'd never experienced before. Marcus and I were reviewing survey data one evening in our office when he looked up from his computer with a familiar expression, the one he got when he'd noticed something interesting in geological maps. "You remember that Thompson Ranch land, the part that didn't become Meadowbrook?" he asked. "There's more? About 80 acres that the developer didn't buy. Sold to a different buyer back in 2015, guy who wanted to keep horses. The surface sale went through, but I'm looking at the deed records and I don't see any mention of mineral rights transfer." I felt a familiar spark of interest. So they might still be with the Thompson family? Or whoever inherited them? Want me to dig deeper? I thought about it. We'd already struck gold once with the Thompson mineral rights. The odds of lightning striking twice seemed remote. But then again, the odds had seemed remote the first time too. And that had worked out better than I could have imagined. "Yeah," I said. "Let's see what we can find. Because that's how it works in Texas. The land tells stories if you know how to read them. The geological formations, the old ranch boundaries, the separated rights that create unexpected opportunities. You just have to be curious enough to look, persistent enough to research, and brave enough to act when you find something worth pursuing. And sometimes, if you're lucky, 3 inches of fence height and a clipboard-wielding HOA president can lead to an oil discovery that changes everything. Not just the money, though that helps, but the whole power dynamic of a neighborhood built on land that remembers what it used to be, and what might still be hidden in the rock thousands of feet below. The well keeps pumping. The checks keep coming. And somewhere in county records across Texas, there are probably other stories waiting to be discovered, other forgotten rights that could change someone's life if they just knew to look. That's what I've learned from all this. The power isn't just in ownership or authority or HOA rules and regulations. The power is in information, in knowing what's possible, and in having the courage to challenge assumptions about who owns what and what it might be worth. Brenda never understood that. She thought power came from a clipboard and a rule book, from the ability to enforce arbitrary standards and make people's lives difficult over meaningless violations. But real power, the kind that actually matters, comes from understanding the bigger picture, from seeing opportunities where others see only obstacles, and from being willing to do the research and take the risks necessary to make things happen. My fence is exactly 6 feet tall now, perfectly compliant with HOA regulations that the new board barely enforces. My lawn is whatever color West Texas summers make it, and nobody cares. My mailbox still has that little dent, and George just waves when he drives past it. The power dynamic in Meadowbrook Estates shifted permanently, and it happened because of rock formations laid down millions of years ago, because of one family's decision to retain mineral rights, and because I got curious about land records when I should have been worrying about my fence. The oil industry calls it a discovery well, that first successful drill that proves a formation is productive. But the real discovery wasn't just the oil. It was discovering that even when you feel powerless, even when some petty authority figure with a clipboard is trying to fine you into submission, there might be resources and opportunities you don't know about yet. You just have to be willing to look for them, to dig through the boring county records and geological surveys and property deeds until you find the thing that changes the equation. Grace and I still talk regularly, splitting royalty payments and discussing new mineral rights opportunities through our research business. Dr. Silva consults for us occasionally, analyzing geological data for promising formations. Patricia from Diamondback has sent other landowners our way, people who know they own mineral rights but don't know what to do with them. The network keeps growing, built on that first accidental discovery under the HOA common area in Meadowbrook Estates. Sometimes I see the old HOA violation notices in a drawer when I'm looking for something else. 3 inches too tall, lawn insufficiently green, mailbox aesthetically non-compliant. They seem like artifacts from another life now. Reminders of a time when I felt trapped by circumstances and arbitrary rules. I keep them not as trophies but as reminders that situations can change, that leverage can shift, and that the thing that seems like your biggest problem might actually be the catalyst for solving all your problems. The wells will produce for years, maybe decades if the geology and economics hold up. The royalty checks will keep coming, sometimes more, sometimes less, but always representing something larger than just money. They represent the idea that doing your research, asking questions, and challenging assumptions can lead to outcomes nobody predicted. They represent the peculiar justice of a situation where the HOA president who tried to fine me for 3 inches of fence ended up losing her position and leaving the neighborhood, while the homeowner she targeted ended up with a reliable income stream from resources she didn't even know were there. That's the story of how I discovered oil under an HOA common area, how one lease changed the power dynamic in my neighborhood forever, and how a petty dispute over fence height led to geological research that changed my life. It's a Texas story, really. The kind that only makes sense in a place where mineral rights are sacred, where fortunes can be made from what lies beneath rather than what shows on the surface, and where the law sides with the person who owns the resources rather than the person who owns the rule book. Brenda Patterson probably tells a different version of this story, one where she was trying to maintain standards and protect property values, only to be undermined by a greedy homeowner who brought an oil company into their quiet neighborhood. That's fine. Everyone's entitled to their perspective. But the facts are the facts. The mineral rights were legally separate, the oil was legitimately there, and the development happened professionally with minimal disruption and actual community benefits. And my fence is now regulation height, though nobody would have noticed or cared if it wasn't. That's the real change, more than the money or the oil or the business opportunities. The real change is living in a neighborhood where the HOA exists to serve the community rather than to enforce arbitrary control, where rules are applied reasonably rather than as weapons, and where people can disagree without resorting to daily fines and retaliatory enforcement. The sun sets over West Texas in shades of orange and purple, painting the flat landscape in colors that seem impossible. I sit on my porch with my bourbon, watching the sky and thinking about geological formations 8,000 feet down, about horizontal drilling technology that can extract oil from precise locations, about separated mineral rights and courthouse records, and the strange paths that lead to unexpected changes in fortune. Tomorrow I'll go back to work, surveying land and analyzing geological data and running the business I've built. Grace will be in Austin, practicing law and managing our mineral rights research company. The wells will keep pumping, the checks will keep coming, and life will continue its complicated forward motion. But tonight, right now, I'm just enjoying the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I stood up to petty tyranny, did my research, took my shot, and came out ahead. And somewhere under the park where kids are playing and families are having evening picnics, thousands of feet down in rock formations older than human civilization, oil is slowly moving through porous stone toward our horizontal wellbore, contributing to production that generates royalty payments that changed my life. The kids playing above it have no idea it's there. Most of their parents don't think about it. But I know, and that knowledge represents something important about paying attention, staying curious, and understanding that surface appearances often hide deeper realities. That's what mineral rights really mean when you think about it. They're about recognizing that there's more to property than what you can see, that value can exist in dimensions most people never consider, and that the person who looks deeper, who does the research and asks the questions others don't think to ask, might discover resources nobody else knew existed. It's a metaphor for life, really, though I'm probably reading too much into it now. The bourbon does that sometimes, makes everything seem philosophical and meaningful, but the core truth remains simple. I found oil under my HOA's common area, worked with the mineral rights owner to lease it, stood up to an authoritarian HOA president who tried to stop it, won in court, and came out ahead financially and personally. The neighborhood is better for it. The community benefits are real. The environmental concerns proved unfounded, and the power dynamic changed forever, shifting away from petty enforcement of minor violations toward a more balanced, reasonable approach to community governance. That's the story. That's what happened. And if you ever find yourself being fined $50 a day over 3 inches of fence height, Maybe take a moment to research your property records, look at geological surveys of your area, and see if there might be resources or opportunities nobody else has noticed yet. Because you never know what might be hidden under the surface, waiting to be discovered by someone curious enough to look.